Welcome to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. In this video, we are going to discuss the quintessential cards needed to build the core of a politics commander deck with Kenrith the Returned King as its general. Kenrith the Returned King was the buy-a-box promo card for Magic's powerful and flavorful fairy tale set, Throne of Eldraine. Through his 5-color identity, Kenny can be called upon to be the general for any commander brew imaginable. If it can be built, then he can command it. As a creature, Kenny is a 5/5 legendary human noble for 4 and 1 white mana. As a toolbox, his litany of activated abilities include, for 1 red mana, all creatures gain trample and haste until end of turn. For 1 and 1 green mana, we put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. For 2 and 1 white mana, target player gains 5 life. For 3 and 1 blue mana, target player draws a card. And for 4 and 1 black mana, we put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control. All of these abilities are functional and relevant, and in addition to his 5-color identity, are the reasons why Kenrith the Returned King is the single most versatile commander option in Magic. In addition to the political force that Kenny can be at the commander table, we are going to craft the core of a coinciding EDH deck around other various political spells and effects, some of which help our opponents, some of which don't help our opponents, some of which help everyone, but all of which help us the most in our quest for imminent victory. We begin the core of this build by discussing some cards that allow all players to vote on how we are rewarded. Let's start with some Will of the Council spells. This mechanic begins a voting process that begins with us and continues with each other player in turn order. With Plea with Power, if more players vote for time, then we take an extra turn after this one. If Knowledge gets the most votes or is tied, then we draw 3 cards. When Custody Squire enters the battlefield, players vote for an artifact, creature, or enchantment card in our graveyard. We return each card with the most votes or tied for the most to our hand. When Council Guardian comes into play, it gains protection from each color with the most votes or tied for the most votes among blue, black, red, or green. Our opponents have the voting power to give us extra turns, card advantage, and protection. But we're not done yet. For each player that votes for Wild after we cast Selvala Stampede, we reveal cards from the top of our library until we reveal a creature card and then put it onto the battlefield. For each player that votes for Free, we may put a permanent card from our hand into play. For Expropriate, we take an extra turn after this one for each vote for Time, and gain control of a permanent owned by each player that voted for Money. More extra turns and battlefield enhancement? Our opponents know what we love most. At times, it is important to let the people voice their concerns, and, at times, it is equally as important for us to act on those concerns. By casting Council's Judgment, we allow each player to vote for a non-land permanent we don't control, and then we exile each permanent with the most votes or tied for the most votes. With Split Decision, if more players vote for Denial, target instant or sorcery spell is countered. If more players vote for Duplication or the vote is tied, we copy the spell and we may choose new targets for the copy. When Magister of Worth comes into play, if Grace gets the most votes, each player returns each creature card from their graveyard to the battlefield. If Condemnation gets the most votes or the vote is tied, we destroy all creatures other than Magister of Worth, ridding the battlefield of troublesome or problematic non-land permanents, protecting the game from bothersome instant or sorcery spells, or benefiting from them, mass recurring creatures, or wiping the board of all but one will show our opponents that their opinions matter too. At times. Managing resources as well as the battlefield are important parts of any game of Magic. Allowing our opponents to police these factors themselves demonstrates our ability to listen to and hear the people. Bite of the Black Rose gives creatures our opponents control -2/-2 until end of turn if Sickness gets the most votes, or each opponent discards 2 cards if Psychosis gets the most votes or the vote is tied. Capital Punishment makes each opponent sacrifice a creature for each death vote, and makes each opponent discard a card for each taxes vote. Tyrant's Choice is similar. If Death gets the most votes, each opponent sacrifices a creature. If Torture gets the most votes or the vote is tied, then each opponent loses 4 life. At the beginning of our upkeep, if Carnage gets the most votes, then Coercive Portal is sacrificed and all non-land permanents are destroyed. If Homage gets the most votes or the vote is tied, then we draw a card. Great care must be taken when considering the far-reaching effects of this artifact, as we stand to lose a great deal of assets should the people band together and vote against us. Our opponents may use their voting privileges haphazardly, or in ways that are not as beneficial as they could be for us. Let's hedge against this possibility of our opponents casting foolish or unreasonable votes by including some ways to favorably influence the voting process. While voting, Ballot Broker, Brago's representative, and Tivit, Seller of Secrets, allow us to vote an additional time. In the case of Tivit, whenever it enters the battlefield or deals combat damage to an opponent, each player votes for evidence or bribery. For each evidence vote, we investigate, and for each bribery vote, we create a treasure token. For a one-time effect, we can cast Illusion of Choice and choose how each player votes this turn. As opposed to having additional votes or choosing how our opponents vote, perhaps a different deterrent is necessary for the purposes of getting what we want. Whenever we finish a round of voting, each opponent who voted for a choice that we didn't vote for loses 2 life with Grudge Keeper. For a down on their life total opponent, this effect is influential enough to gain their support in the political arena. Perhaps it may be more beneficial to form temporary alliances in order to get what we want. When Lauren of the Third Path comes into play, we destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. If we tap her, then perhaps we can tempt an opponent into getting something we want by letting them draw a card. Of course, we draw a card as well. Why make one opponent happy when we can make them all happy? By casting Cut a Deal, each opponent draws a card. And then we draw a card for each opponent that did so. Free cards in hand may result in free favors later in the game. Let's extend this ideology even further with Master of Ceremonies. At the beginning of our upkeep, each opponent chooses money, friends, or secrets. For each opponent that chooses money, we and that player each create a treasure token. For each opponent that chooses friends, we and that player each create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token. For each opponent that chooses secrets, we and that player each draw a card. We help the people, we help ourselves. Let's continue. Any player may pay 1 and a black mana to put a plot counter on Deadly Designs. When there are 5 or more plot counters on it, we sacrifice it and then destroy up to 2 target creatures. The up to text protects us from any opponents that may have malice in their hearts by putting plot counters onto this enchantment with the motivation of destroying 1 or more of our creatures. Can you imagine, after all we've done for them? Perhaps we can tempt our opponents even further into getting what we want. Everyone loves creatures, even our opponents. Perhaps we can appeal to them through Tempt with Vengeance. We pay all of the mana for X, and each opponent has the option of creating X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste for free. What a friendly gesture. Of course, we do the same, and for each opponent who decides to do so, we create an additional X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste. Perhaps our opponents have some beloved creatures rotting away in their graveyards. Well, we could cast Tempt with Immortality, and each opponent may return a creature card from their graveyard to the battlefield for free. We are so accommodating. Of course, we do the same, and for each opponent who opts for this recursion, we return another creature card from our graveyard to play. Maybe we have a desirable creature on our side of the battlefield, and we want our opponents to partake in the splendor of having a copy of their own. Tempt with Reflections can scratch that itch. We choose target creature we control, and each opponent may create a token that's a copy of that creature for free. Our compassion knows no bounds. Of course, we do the same, and for each opponent who makes a copy of it, we create another token copy of that creature. With these creatures inundating the battlefield, it makes perfect sense to extend our goodwill even further by making them bigger. Tempt with Glory gives each opponent the option of putting a +1/+1 counter on each creature they control for free. We are so hospitable. Of course, we do the same, and for each opponent who buffs their creatures this way, we put another +1/+1 counter on our creatures. What amazing gestures! Oh, but we're not done yet. If there's one thing Magic players love more than creatures, it's mana. So let's cast Tempt with Discovery and provide each opponent the opportunity to search their library for any land card and put it onto the battlefield for free. How gracious of us. Of course, we do the same, and for each opponent who chooses to accept our philanthropy, we search for another land. Perhaps our opponents would be more amenable to repeatable mana acceleration. At the beginning of our upkeep, Tempting Contract offers each opponent the option to create a treasure token for free. We are so courteous. For each opponent who does, we create a treasure token as well. These well-mannered overtures should buy us the support of everyone at the table. While we should always be considered a friend, there may be opponents that do not share this self-appraisal. Thus, we must decide whether or not each opponent should be perceived as a friend or as a foe. With Pier's Whim, each friend searches their library for any land card and puts it into play tapped, while each foe sacrifices an artifact or enchantment they control. For Vertis's Maneuver, each friend returns a creature card from their graveyard to their hand, while each foe sacrifices a creature. Zyndersplit's Judgment has each friend create a token that's a copy of a creature they control, while each foe returns a creature they control to their owner's hand. Corvath's Fury provides a Wheel +1 effect for each friend, while it deals damage to each foe equal to the number of cards in that player's hand. Regna's Sanction puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature controlled by a friend, while each foe selects one untapped creature they control and then taps the rest. At times, it may be beneficial to remove ourselves from the voting and choosing processes and permit our opponents to make the choices. Guided Passage allows an opponent to choose a creature card, a land card, and a non-creature non-land card from our revealed library, and we put them into our hand. Manifold Insights reveals the top 10 cards of our library. Starting with the next opponent in turn order, each opponent chooses a different non-land card from among them, and we put the chosen cards into our hand. Fact or Fiction reveals the top 5 cards of our library. An opponent separates these cards into 2 piles, and we choose one pile and put it into our hand. Our opponents have the power to choose how we benefit. Aren't politics amazing? Throughout the game, our opponents have tough choices to make. Gifting our opponents the power to choose is what makes us so beloved by the people. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, Fate Spinner makes that player choose Draw Step, Main Phase, or Combat Phase, and then that player skips each instance of the chosen step or phase this turn. Seize the Spotlight lets each opponent choose Fame or Fortune. For each player that chooses Fame, we gain control of a creature they control until end of turn. We untap it, and it has haste. For each player that chooses Fortune, we draw a card and we create a treasure token. We give the people what they want the most, the power to choose. Let's bring this video to a close with some cards that synergize with and enhance our politics theme. For the purposes of interaction, Gwafa Hazid Profiteer puts bribery counters on creatures we don't control, and when we do, that creature's controller draws a card. Creatures with bribery counters on them can't attack or block. When Zancha Sleeper Agent enters the battlefield, it does so under the control of target opponent. Zancha attacks each turn, but can't attack us or a planeswalker we control. Any player may pay 3 mana to have Zancha's controller lose 2 life, and then that player draws a card. At the beginning of our end step, Mathis Fiend Seeker puts a bounty counter on target creature an opponent controls. As long as a creature has a bounty counter on it, it also has, when this creature dies, each opponent draws a card and gains 2 life. Drawing cards is such a powerful motivator, isn't it? It doesn't have Will of the Council or Friend or Foe, but when Druid of Purification enters the battlefield, starting with us, each player may choose an artifact or enchantment we don't control. Then each permanent chosen this way is destroyed. With Fractured Identity, we choose target non-land permanent and exile it. Then each player other than its controller creates a token that's a copy of it. Continuing our removal trend is Promise of Loyalty, a fitting card name for this build. Each player puts a vow counter on a creature they control and then sacrifices the rest. Each creature with a vow counter on it can't attack us or planeswalkers we control. Appealing to the people can also be achieved through Orzhov Advocist's upkeep trigger. Each player may put 2+1/+1 counters on a creature they control, and if a player does, then creatures that player controls can't attack us or a planeswalker we control until our next turn. We want what's best for the people, as long as what's best for them is even better for us. This video provided a blueprint for building the core of a politics commander deck around Kenrith the Returned King as its general. Other removal and disruption spells, ramp, and the land base can vary from build to build, and also are dependent on metagame preferences and availability. The cards discussed during this video are suggested options for constructing the core of a political EDH deck, in addition to providing ways to optimize this theme. Let me know your thoughts about these recommendations in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic.